All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. We just shifted the camera around, so hopefully get a little bit better light. But if you are having trouble seeing, let us know and we'll try to adjust things further. We're getting a lot of changing light from the trees coming through the window. So we're just trying to adapt with it. But my name is Melissa Drake. I'm the museum educator here at the Buttonwoods Museum. We are also the Haverhill Historical Society. So we cover the history of Haverhill, the 375 years since European colonization, but then we also have an archaeological collection and teach about the native peoples who called Haverhill or Pentucket as they knew it home before them. So today we have our archaeology volunteer, Nancy Lebar, with us, and she's going to be talking to you about the Luce Archaeology Collection, which includes archaeological artifacts from both Haverhill and Bradford, which is now part of Haverhill, but wasn't at the time. But before we get started, I do want to read this brief land acknowledgement about where we are today. Located on the traditional lands and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present, we acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. So I am going to turn this over to Nancy now.
Okay, we're on. And thank you all for coming to this brave new world today as we take a look at some kind of old things in this brave new world. What we want to talk about today is our archaeological collection here at Buttonwoods. And this archaeological collection came about as the efforts of Frederick Luce and his wife, Luce, along with any number of other people. And I did a little research. I went down to special collections at the library last year when we could still go to the library and it was open. And I learned some things about the Haverhill Archaeological Society. The first meeting was February 23rd, 1914. And it was decided that meetings would be held the first Monday of each month. By January 1915, the minutes indicate that there was a need for more room. Now, why would there be a need for more room? Well, the Haverhill Archaeological Society had a fairly large number of members, and each of these members was a collector. And we find through the records at special collections in the library and also at the records we have here at Buttonwoods is that the members who were collectors would bring their collections to these Haverhill Archaeological Society meetings, and most of them donated their collections. So we have lists and lists and lists. For example, by January 1st, 1919, there were 5,870 specimens, they call them specimens, in the collection. So it was decided in March 1921 that the Haverhill Archaeological Society would join up with the Haverhill Historical Society here in Buttonwoods. And apparently the entire collection was moved from the Haverhill Library. Of course, this is the old library building that's not there anymore, over here to Buttonwoods. And it's here now. And just so that you know, down in the basement of Buttonwoods, there is a very large metal cabinet with lots and lots of drawers in it. And that's where the stuff is kept, although we do have quite a bit on exhibit. Now, let's talk about collectors. This is a cigar box. And in the cigar box are a number of chips. This, for the most part, is debitage. This is when folks made stone tools, this is what was chipped off, and we call it debitage, and it's in a cigar box. Now, I don't know anything about where these came from, and a lot of collections are in this shape. At home, I have another cigar box with a number of artifacts in it that my own grandfather picked up along the banks of the Illinois River, probably, roughly between 1900 and he passed away in 1953. But I know that he went out, he would collect stuff, and now I have it all in a cigar box at home. Of course, I don't know anything about it. Here's another form. This is from the Smith Motor Truck Corporation, Smith Form of Truck Building, Michigan Boulevard at 16th Street in Chicago. So again, got a lot of stuff in here and we don't know anything about it. But there it is. Now, let's get into what we really have. And you're going to know that a lot of this stuff is in plastic baggies because I think back in the mid 1980s going forward, the Luce Collection, of course, was here, and I suspect a lot of it was in wooden boxes by now. But somebody who knew what they were doing sat down and started to put everything into baggies, and each baggie is marked. So this baggie says Bradley's Brook, Section H, Haverhill, and then it has a site number on it. And every site in Massachusetts has a site number. But here we have, and then listed down at the bottom, it says projectile points. Okay, that's neat. And you'll notice that each bag has a number on it. And the reason why each bag has a number on it is that as Fred Luce and most of the other collectors in the Haverhill Archaeological Society did their collecting, they were very, very careful to keep records. And we'll get down to the records in a little while. I'll show you the actual logbook that we have. So they would write down where they collected, when they collected. Very often you will have a description of the site, exactly where it was. And then each site and each artifact would get a number. So on this bag, we see the number 4788. And we open this bag up and we pull out the artifact. 4788. So that's what makes this collection so very, very special. We know where things came from. If we're looking for something in particular, we can find it. It may take a little while, but we can find it. So let's just take a look at what all we have here. I love this. This is just so special. It's probably a drill. And its number is 4789. So if I were to look up in the record, I would find 47989, and I would know where it came from. Actually, I probably should know where it is right now. Here's another wee little drill. Oh, I need to do that.
It's over there.
Where did it go? There it is.
Here.
There it is. These things don't break. They're pretty tough. There's another neat little one. Let's just kind of move on down here. This is actually pretty much when people think about archaeological collections, they think, ooh, arrowheads. Yeah, let's go out and find some arrowheads. Technically, we call them projectile points.
I have it a little right here. So you can bring it in all the way to right about where my hand is.
It's about there.
There you go.
That's a pretty good one. Let's see, we've got a couple of other pretty good ones here.
We can bring it up to about right here.
Right there.
Yeah, you can bring it in.
And amazingly, there's a lot of these in our collection. But there are some other pretty important things too. Woodworking tools. Nice hatchet here.
Yeah, there you go.
You can see where it's been worked around the middle there. It probably at one time had a pretty sharp edge. Pretty good for cutting wood. This may well have been a hoe or maybe another kind of hatchet.
Yeah, there you go.
Something like that. This is what's called a hammerstone. I can, my hands are kind of small, but I can heft it like this. And you can see on either side, it's clearly been used. Some of the other fun things we have, these are fondly known in the archaeology world as celts. That's the working edge there, and it was probably hafted somewhere around here. Sometimes they're called hatchets. And for some reason, and we researched this and researched this, the initials DP are on it. And the only thing we can figure is that probably the collector who found this had the initials DP, but we have yet to figure out who that person is. Here's a much smaller hatchet, or probably a hatchet. And then we move into some of the other interesting things. This is a fragment of a Steatite Bowl. And before the making of pottery came along, bowls were very often carved out of stone. And this is a classic one. This one happened to have been found at Pentucket Lake. So that's just a fragment there. This is a much bigger fragment. And of course, this is a little bit of a frustration because I have no number on it. So, oh, there it is. I'm sorry, 1742. There was another one that didn't have a number on it. And I'm not, let's see, 1742, George Fellarm in Groveland. So we get into making ceramics probably about 2,000 years ago in what we call the early woodland period. And we have lots and lots of ceramics that look very much like this. There's, on the outside, there's what we call cord marking, which was probably a paddle wrapped around with twine. And it would, the actual bowl or vessel would be marked with the cord marking there. And if you're a very patient person, and I've done this when I was much younger, you would be presented with a whole bunch of little pieces like this. And your challenge would be to put that vessel back together again. It's an interesting business. So we do know that there were lots and lots of ceramics. These happen to come from the Walker camp here in Haverhill. And that was really a very, very important site. We have here a very large plummet for fishing. Attach it to the net, toss it out where you're going fishing, and hopefully you're going to net yourself something. And again, I don't have a number on this one, so I'm not entirely certain where it came from.
That one gets used in the teaching collection now.
Yeah, this goes in the education box because we don't know much about it. So what are we eating? Again, we've got some things from the Walker site here. This is a bag of bone fragments. There we go, bone fragments. And if you look up close at these, again, they've all got their numbers on them. We'll just put some where you can see them. they've clearly been under the earth for a while. And it's written on here, calcinated bone, faunal, which means probably animal bone. So this is probably what was left over from somebody's meal or maybe a number of meals. Another interesting thing that Fred and Sarah and the rest of the family did was starting in, I think it was about 1915, they would take 2 weeks every summer and they would go down to Cape Cod and they would dig sites on Cape Cod. And I spent 2 summers ago going through, I think there were 6 very large boxes of things that they had found while digging in Cape Cod. And one of the interesting things was that there were lots and lots and lots of shells. And right here we have a picture of Fred and Sarah. Fred's doing the work and I guess Sarah's supervising in that particular picture. And I'm going to read the back of this because I think it tells you a little bit about them. Shell heap on high bluff south of Wellfleet Bay at Wellfleet, Massachusetts. This heap is east of Indian Neck. Photo looking north over bay of the right photo will be seen the photo of Mrs. Sarah F. Luce, associate curator for the Haverhill Archaeological Society for 1916, sitting on the edge of, I'm not quite sure what bank. To the left of something will be seen Fred A. Luce, curator for the Haverhill Archaeological Society for 1916, working on shell heap. Near this shot, a fine hoe was found just after this photo was taken. So here they are actually out there doing field work in Wellfleet. I don't think Wellfleet looks like that anymore. But as I went through these boxes, I found lots and lots of shells. There were some stone tools, but not a lot. There was some pottery, not a lot. And then I discovered later on that most of the stone tools and most of the ceramics ended up here in Buttonwood. So where did these boxes come from? Well, they had all been sent down to the museum, the Peabody Museum in Andover. And basically the faunal remains, the animals and the shells, had been analyzed down there. So I discovered that we knew what kind of shells they were finding, what kind of faunal remains they were finding. There were whales, there were porpoises, there were lots and lots of birds, and of course there were lots and lots of shells. So we know that Fred went to Cape Cod. We know that he did a lot of his work around here. This is Ward Hill. This is another Ward Hill. I've already mentioned Georgetown. We have quite a bit of things from Groveland. Another favorite area of his was the Peasley Garrison House, which is, of course, out in the eastern part of the town. But his favorite collecting place was, and I'm going to show you a map here, his favorite collecting place was right near where he lived. And because it's right near where I live, I have an idea of the geography down there. And there was at one time a trotting park. And then later on it turned into an airport. But as it happens, Fred lived right on the edge of this. So it's down where Newton Road and Giles Street come together. And if you look at it now, there's just like a little road, and then it looks like a swamp. But it really did used to be a trotting park, and it really did used to be an airport. And because he lived right on the edge of it, that's where he did a lot of collecting. So when I go through the collection that we have here, I discover over and over and over again, he is written in Trotting Park or Haverhill Airport. And one of the things that he did that I truly appreciate was that he drew maps. Here's a pretty good map that shows basically the eastern side of Haverhill. So we've got Pentucket Lake, which I know is also called Round Pond. We have Plug Pond in there. We have the various streets that are in there. And he would mark on these maps where he found different things. So that's all quite fascinating. Here's another good one. This shows the Canosa Trotting Park campsite. And he put in basically a little guide to what he found where. And I think it's important to know that Fred did all these maps himself. He apparently attended art school at some point early in his life. And we know from going through his notes, he would carefully sketch different aspects of each site. We usually call them features. So if the site included a fire pit, he would do the right thing. He would basically excavate the fire pit in layers, taking down half of it, and then he would sketch the entire thing. Usually in watercolor, which I found quite interesting, although I think he used colored pencils too. So we have quite a few of his drawings. And he would draw maps of everything. So this is just a very, very small collection of the maps. So let's sort of move on, talk a little bit about food preparation. This is called a mortar. And actually, this is the pestle part of the mortar. The mortars are in the other room, and I kind of looked at them thought, well, do I want to carry one of them out of here? But the mortars tend to be quite heavy, and I decided not to do that. So here's the pestle. It's basically a grinding stone, or you can do that. I think this is another one. I'm not entirely certain, but it looks to have pretty much the same function. And another part, and this was much later in Fred's life, he, for some reason, he went to California and he dug a site on the edge of an airport. And we have that collection here too. So it's the usual collection of different artifacts and Fred's notes on that particular site. Another site that he did was the Macy Mound, which happens to be in Florida. And then as we go through his notes, and this is just a tiny bit of it, upstairs, there are notebooks upon notebooks upon notebooks, lots and lots of letters. And Fred apparently had an ongoing friendship with any number of collectors of Native American artifacts all up and down the East Coast. And it looks as though Fred and Thera would take a trip. I don't know if they brought the kids along or not, But they would drive from Massachusetts down through North Carolina, down to Florida. They do a little archaeology in Florida. They drive back. They would visit other collectors. They would pick up things from other collectors. So we have quite a bit of stuff here. He also spent a lot of time up in New Hampshire in the Lake Winnipesaukee area. And we have any number of artifacts that came from there. The other huge thing that we have, along with all these notebooks and personal letters and professional letters, is he loved to take pictures. And we have glass slides upon glass slide. There are boxes and boxes and boxes of glass slides. And luckily, all of them had been cataloged. So I did have a question earlier this year when I couldn't get back to the museum. Somebody was wanting to know if there were pictures of Wellfleet in the collection. So one of the things I'm going to need to do is get back into the catalog and take a look at whether or not we have pictures of Wellfleet. You know, this one's close because, you know, at least it describes where we're looking at in Wellfleet Harbor, but I suspect there are probably more pictures back there. So if the person who wanted to know that information is on this call, I'm going to find it. It's going to take me some time. These things don't show up real easily. Just other general information, and when we're doing education for kids, this is part of our education box, we talk about New World cultigens. Corn, squash.
And what is meant by altigen?
A cultigen is what you grow, the food that you grow.
Okay.
And beans, corn, squash, and beans. And probably all of you have heard about how the Native Americans taught the Pilgrims that first dreadful year how to plant their fields. This is what we grew. You know, you get your dead fish, you make a little pill, dead fish in there is fertilizer, you plant your corn, plant your beans, the bean stalk grows up corn, and you plant your squash, and the leaves from the squash make some nice shade. So you've got yourself a nice little garden there. And we've also got some nuts. These are all over the place. The other thing.
We did have a question come in if you want to take that now, or we can do it at the end. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to bring up the chat. There we go. Could you talk about the ethical issues involved with amateur archaeologists disturbing Native American sites?
Yep. Yep. They're commonly known as potters. And basically, if they know that a site is there, they go in when nobody's looking and they can wreck a site. And this has just been an ongoing issue for years and years and years. I wish there was a good way to stop it. One of the things I learned as an undergraduate, I think on my very first day, was that we did not let the local newspaper in Chillicothe, Ohio, know that we were even there. And that was one way of protecting the site that we were working at the time. Sadly, this does not work. And I think that we have lost a lot of stuff because of the amateurs. And you know, Fred and the entire Haverhill Archaeological Society, they were all amateurs. But at least they knew what they were doing. And they were careful about it. But the thing of it is, once you set a trowel into the dirt, or once you set a shovel into the dirt, basically, you've wrecked that. So yeah, it is a problem. And I wish I knew what the answer was. I know the National Park Service just gets deserved over some of the things that happen, especially out in the West. Okay? Let's talk about one of my favorite, along with the photographs and the maps and the pages and pages and pages of notes. We have four journals this size and two much smaller journals. And we think somewhere out there, there's one more journal, and I spent quite a bit of time really looking through everything I could find down at the Haverhill Library, thinking maybe the other journal ended up there in special collections, and I never could find it. But a lot of other interesting things. And these are all done in Thera Luce's handwriting, which I find quite interesting. And they are so very, very detailed. So here we have the Bradley book campsite, Haverhill. This site is situated along the north bank of the Merrimack River at Wardhill Point. And she describes the site, although I'm sure that Fred and she would come up with this together, but her handwriting was much better. And then we have listed Bradley Brook, Haverhill, number 787, Triangular War Point, number 788, Grilled Ceremonial, 789, 64 Fragments of Clay Pots. So down there, we had some of the Bradley Brook sites stuck out. This is how the records were kept. And I'm so in awe that we have this. I'm so in awe that they actually did all of this. That's just amazing. And as I said, we have four journals. One of them is kind of interesting, and it's in Fred's handwriting. And basically, he wrote out a couple of pages of how to do amateur archaeology. And he knew what he was talking about. We know that he was in frequent communication with a guy named Warren Moorhead, who was the director down at the Andover Peabody Museum. And Warren Moorhead was kind of an interesting guy. He really didn't have an academic degree, but he had lots and lots of experience, and he published. And one of the things I was doing this year was that somehow we came up with a whole box of books and books that Fred had collected down through the years. And there were books and many, many little pamphlets and booklets that Warren Moorhead had written about his archaeological experience. So that's part of our collection here too. And I finally finished going through that box a couple of weeks ago. So we've got it all here. And one of the most interesting things I found was in 1911, Yale University did basically an archaeological expedition to Peru. And I'm thinking, how would you even get to Peru in 1911, let alone do everything that archaeologists need to do? And apparently they proved from Yale in this, I think they got some funding from the National Geographic Society. And we actually have the full publication of this Yale University expedition to Peru back in 1911. It was finally published in 1912. And Fred, being Fred, got his hands on it. And it is now in our collection. There was also a little booklet that was published in 1864, I think, describing various ceramics from around the world. So these are things that we have that I don't very much that anybody else has, but now we have them. That's all quite interesting. Let's get on with some questions.
Yeah. So if you have any questions for Nancy, you can either drop them in the chat box, or since we're a pretty small group, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question that way. I'll give you a couple moments if you're typing.
Hey, Nancy, this is Mary Ann. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah. Do you feel that the greater Haverhill population, citizens, are aware of this collection? And is there potential for research papers, or my grandchild calls it the time of the germ? When the time of the germ is over, ability for students, graduate or otherwise, to come in and do any of their own research or write-ups or so forth. Because it's such a great asset. It's such a great asset. That was more than one question, Nancy.
Yeah, the research, every time I pick some of this up, I think, I wish I knew more about this. All of those notebooks that Fred kept, I think they're called field notebooks. I would dearly like for somebody to sit down and go through those site by site and write up something about that. One of the best things we have, I meant to mention this, back in 1986, Massachusetts Historical Commission, Thomas F. Malstadt, consulting archaeologist, did this huge survey of the collection here. This just goes on for pages and pages and pages. And he lists all of the sites and he writes down recommendations. Buttonwood's Museum is well suited to present an archaeological display to the public. The basement of Penny Hall would provide more than adequate space for an exhibit, and the glass display cases, which the Haverhill Archaeological Society originally had made in 1920s, are still service. Okay, we do have that. But yeah, I'd really like to see more of this out at some point. And yes, for the most part, those artifacts which cannot be attributed to specific locations, of which there are several boxes, should still be used for the display because you're here. And, you know, just going through this yesterday, Mary Ann, for those of you who don't, Mary Ann is another one of the volunteers here, Mary Ann, and I frequently consult on different things. As I was going through the collection yesterday, I kept thinking about all the different places that this collection had come from. And I've just touched on a couple of them today. And I'm thinking maybe somebody at some point needs to sit down and organize it even better so that we have the parts of the collection that came directly from Haverhill, the parts of the collection that maybe came from Groveland, from Bradford. I think there's some things from Boxford, some things from Amesbury. And as Dr. Malstadt pointed out, there are things that we don't know anything about, where they came from. Maybe those ought to be separated out at some point. And then going back to Fred's field notes, And I discovered a lot of interesting things in the minutes from the Haverhill Archaeological Society, which are all down at the library. Lots and lots of detail about what was out there, who brought it in, where they found it. Yeah, we need to do a lot more research here.
So we have another question. Do you have any information about the research being done next to America's Stonehenge in Salem, which used to be part of Haverhill? I was told by the owner there were archaeologists studying a potential village site in the river there.
Wouldn't surprise me. I'd like to know more about that too. I wonder if they've done any work this year. Yeah, hey, that's something to find out. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there was a village site there.
And then also they wanted to know, can we visit to view the collection? Yes and no.
Yes and no. Eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have some of the collection out in Tenney Hall. And this annual event, Archaeology Day, we pull out more of the collection. Yeah. I'd sure like to see more of it on display someday.
Yeah, I'd say that in general right now we are closed, so yeah. No, but we do have like a permanent exhibit that includes some of these archaeological items, but as Nancy has been pointing out, we have a whole lot more than just that. So this is really our annual event where we're able to pull some more things out, but I think for like if it was sort of more of like a research viewing, like you wanted to do research on the collection, that would be something to talk to Jan, our curator, about, which probably could be arranged again post-pandemic times. Yes. Yeah. And the chat. Oh, so the same person, can I, how can I help volunteer to sort and categorize the collection? I can again answer this one, get in touch with Jan, our curator. Again, we're not really bringing volunteers in very much since due to COVID-19, but once we start moving more towards reopening the physical space for volunteers, yeah, definitely get in touch. Was there any archaeological oversight at the new construction sites in downtown Haverhill? Was anything discovered if that was the case?
I really doubt it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's, I don't know.
That new building that's going on.
I don't know.
Yeah, actually, like one of the things that the Haverhill Archaeological Society was able to do back in the early 1900s is that we discovered that there were all sorts of things that came out of construction sites. So we know what was going on back then, but I really doubt that anything. Right down the hill from where I live, there's a whole new housing development going in, and every once in a while, I kind of looked at it and I think, you know, I could just kind of walk back there with my flag. Maybe nobody would notice me because it would be an ideal site. You know, if I were a Native American, I would certainly have a hunting camp up there.
How many artifacts do you think Fred and his family found, and how many volumes of notes did he leave? So I think you mentioned the volumes of notes.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about this survey that Dr. Malstadt did. He did come up with a final count. Let's see if I can find it. The Buttonwoods collection contains well over 10,000 prehistoric artifacts. And this was what they had back in 1986. And since then, because some things come up from the Peabody Museum in Andover, I know there's more. During the study, 9,118 artifacts were inventoried from the 56 site and Landover Code assemblages. accompanying the site assemblages are artifact catalogs, maps, photographs, and Luce's unpublished manuscript. Oh, that's right. Yeah, his unpublished manuscripts. That's a whole nother thing.
And how many volumes did you say there were? I think you said there was 4.
We have 4 of this big size,
Mhm.
and then there are 2 more of a smaller size. And we suspect that there's 1 more big one like this, but up to this point, we haven't found it.
Mm.
And as you can see, these are hefty. It's a big size, and for the most part, I'm not going to say all the pages are written on, but for the most part, most of the pages
They're pretty full.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And this is more of a comment. I heard that there are some mounds in Mosley State Park, and I suspect there are many here also.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I've heard about the Mosley ones too, and I've taken the dog out there to hike. I haven't actually figured out where they are yet. No, it wouldn't surprise me. And because I did most of my education in Ohio, which of course is the epicenter of mound builders. And one of the things we learned was that the mound building tradition actually went out from Ohio, and we do find them in other places. So I would not be surprised.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about the burial traditions?
Yeah, the burials that we have found, or that Fred found, for the most part were what we call extended burials. They were laid out flat, and sadly there weren't too many of them, and it's very difficult from reading the notes whether or not there were any burial goods with them.
Hi.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Hi there. How are you?
Hi, I can see
I
you,
was
Laura.
wondering more about their burial traditions. Do you know, do they bury their dead or do they burn them? And did they put all their stone tools, like say, on top of the body? Do you know what I'm saying? Or do you think they burnt the body? I mean, when I'm walking around in the woods everywhere, I see things that look like collections of stone tools on the path that has been worn away. Different shapes of stones everywhere. Everywhere I go, I'm telling you, everywhere I see these things. Everywhere. It's amazing. Haverhill's an amazing place for stone collections, just in the ground, especially on paths, walk paths, as the dirt clears away. And there's sections that looks like there's like an axe head and like a little, like a hammerhead, then a big spearhead, and then like a knife, and then a little pan tool, and then a Manitou stone. I mean, it's pretty amazing everywhere. Like we're walking the paths here around Winnikinny or whatever. So I was just wondering if you knew anything about that, like about like how the mounds were built. Did they take people's tools maybe when they died and added them to the mound, or were they reused by the tribe? You know what I'm saying?
In the burials that I worked in Ohio, usually you had what we call grave goods in with the burial, and there might be a couple of projectile points. There might be some woodworking tools. Invariably, we found ceramics, and those were all what we call grave goods. And for the most, don't know I ever. We worked a very, very big site up in northwestern Ohio with lots and lots of burials. And there weren't any mounds, they were just buried.
Hmm.
And for the most part, they all had grave goods with them.
They had bad goods with them?
Yeah, grave goods, that's what grave goods, yeah.
Great goods. I've heard about the burial mound they discovered in Salisbury. Did you hear about that burial mound they discovered in Salisbury? It was like dated like to be 9,500 years old. All the bodies were in like a crouched position with their heads facing north. They were covered in red ochre. There was like shells, layers and layers and layers.
Yeah.
It's in Salisbury.
You know, a lot of times, you know, we have extended burials, we have what are called flex burials, the crouch position, yeah, all of that happens. And
Because I've also heard that in Europe, they had that tradition, some places in Europe too, which is strange. It's an interesting coincidence where they're
yeah,
buried in a crouched position, head facing north in the red ochre, something. So I wonder if there's a connection to Europe somehow, some way with some ancient travelers that came over. It's fascinating.
I call it psychic unity of mankind. We have this issue, we have to figure out what to do with his body and make sure that it gets on to its next place safely. So, you know, do we put it in crouched? Do we put it in flexed? And, you know, certainly we have the red ochre, or we can toss that around.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm of the school that I truly think Native Americans probably came from Asia. But, you know, who knows? There may have been some connection with Europe.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's interesting. I went to American Stonehenge and they said it on the solstice, there's a calendar on the solstice, the light over the rock lines up exactly with England's Stonehenge. It goes right through the two main pillars.
That's definitely on my list of the place to go to.
I will say
Oh,
that
it's so fascinating.
more recent burial sites, sometimes those details are purposely kept in secret at the request of the Native people. Their descendants today have purposely requested that those details not be released. So while you may be very curious about hearing about these burial sites that are being discovered more recently, there is a reason that this information is not being released to the public. It is out of respect and at the request of their descendants.
I understand that. I don't want to know the location.
Well,
I just want to know what the tradition was. I understand.
No,
that's
what I mean.
So that
not only the location, but also the actual practices, what specifically is found there, how it is arranged, like all those details about how the burial happened, those are also being kept back from the public purposely. And also, for that matter, there's not as much archaeology being done at those sites, period. Again, like the archaeology isn't even happening, again, out of respect to those Native people. Sometimes they are interested in working with archaeologists, sometimes they're not. And so we do need to be mindful and respectful of those decisions.
Oh, I don't think you should dig anywhere at all. I think that's disrespectful. But sometimes these things, like as I'm walking a path, the dirt falling away and covers these interesting stones, and it seems like you know, I just don't know. And I can see mounds in the woods and stuff. It's just amazing. It's like I'm fascinated by it.
There's things all around this.
Just rich history.
Since we are reaching the end since we are reaching the end of the time, do we have any other questions from other folks that I want to make sure that I get to before we close out? Any other questions from folks? Okay.
Wait, this is Mary Ann again. I just want everyone to know the amount of persistent, difficult, and sometimes humorous work that Nancy has done. And she needs to be commended, so I want to do that. I basically have done textiles, and I just kind of, before the time of the germ, we would have great discussions on what we were doing, and I have learned a great deal from Nancy, and I hope that I get back in there over her shoulder after again, as my granddaughter calls it, the time of the germ is over.
I look over your shoulder too a lot, Mary.
Oh, I know you did. No, I don't want this to be a mutual thing. Nancy, you've done a huge amount of work. That's it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful way to end the program. Thank you so much, Marianne, for those words. And thank you, Nancy, for taking the time to walk us through the archaeological collection that we have here. Some of it. Some of it.
Yep. See you, Marianne.
So we have someone on the call who is Fred's great-grandson, and then also someone who is Luce's great-great-grandson.
Probably.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my word.
So hello, Luces.
Would love to meet them. Did they see the picture?
Yeah, did they all? I know at least one of them joined a little bit later, so we can go back and show the picture.
Yeah, because there's other pictures up there as well.
This is the picture that we had out, but we've got other pictures as well.
We just like that one, Jan like that one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.